Breaking tonight, a former employee at the Department of Homeland Security is blowing the whistle, contending that his superiors shut down a program that might have provided an early warning on the terrorists behind last week's attack in California. We will speak with him in a moment. But first to Trace Gallagher with the backstory. Trace?
Megan, for background, we should note in the early 2000s, Philip Haney was among the founding members of the Department of Homeland Security and was later assigned to the Intelligence Review Unit, or IRU. His job was to investigate individuals with potential links to terrorism. And it was in that capacity that Haney says he noticed a trend of people with suspected radicalized ties coming into the United States. So he began looking into a collection of global networks that were infiltrating radical Islamists into the U.S. In other words, Haney and his team were getting somewhere. But a year into that investigation, Haney says they got a visit from the State Department and the Homeland Security Civil Rights Division, who said that tracking these groups and individuals was, quote, problematic because they were Islamic groups. Haney says the investigation was shut down and 67 of his records deleted. Among them, an investigation into an organization with ties to the mosque in Riverside that San Bernardino terrorist Saeed Farouk attended. Haney believes if his work had been allowed to continue, it may have thwarted last week's attack. Haney says a few years ago he notified Congress and the DHS Inspector General about the investigation into Islamic groups being terminated, but instead of the investigation being reinstated, Haney claims his superiors retaliated, pulling him from his duties and revoking his security clearance. We just got off the phone with Homeland Security. They told us there are many holes in Mr. Haney's story, but they couldn't comment further because of privacy laws. Megan.
Trace, thank you. Joining me now with more, former Department of Homeland Security employee Philip Haney, and with reaction, Mark Thiessen, the former chief presidential speechwriter for President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. Thank you both for being here. Philip, why do you believe that the work you were pursuing may have led to the detection of these two?
The network of individuals that we worked with were tied to a large group called Tablighi Jamaat, part of a larger group called Deobandi. We had thousands of organizations or individuals in the database, and we tracked them as they moved in and out of the United States on the visa waiver program. That's what first brought the group to our attention. And as we developed the case and started putting the pieces in place, we gained more and more evidence of their activities.
And they were connected to Farouk's mosque?
The Farouk Mosque is called Dar Uloom. It's a global network of similar kinds of mosques under the umbrella of this organization.
And so under your program, you would have identified the mosque and done what?
I can tell you how I would have identified it, because individuals that were already in the case in 2012 went to that mosque. Therefore, as we were tracking them, we would have put the red light on them. Therefore, two things very plausibly would have happened. Either Syed would have been put on the no-fly list because of association with that masjid, and/or the K-1 visa that his wife was given may have been denied because of his affiliation with a known organization.
And you say they shut you down because they felt this was essentially profiling of Muslims.
They specifically said that because we FOIA'd the case and we got the internal memos, and it says that we are not allowed to develop a case based on Tablighi Jamaat specifically and/or any Islamic group.
I mean, we're not talking about peace-loving Muslims who are in the United States who have assimilated. We're talking about Islamists who believe in Sharia and much worse.
Yes, the correct term is Salafi. It means original. They go back to the way Islam used to be at the very beginning. Everybody in the world outside of America knows about the Deobandis, i.e. the Tablighi Jamaat group. We don't know as much about them here yet, but that was exactly the organization that I worked with. We started the case 6 years prior. Then I came to the National Targeting Center and worked on that case specifically. Then I went back to my home port, and I discovered that as soon as I left, they shut the case down. By the way, they gave me a commendation letter for finding 300 terrorists related specifically to the initiative.
Mark, we've seen the dismantling of the intelligence we had set up in the Iraq area. after we took over there. We've seen the CIA black sites where we interrogated terrorists. That's done.
Yep.
They just further eroded our abilities to interrogate terrorists on Capitol Hill.
That's right.
One after the other. We're seeing, I mean, the president holding don't discriminate against Muslims up on equal footing to we don't want any more terror attacks. Right? I'm not saying discrimination is a good thing, but what we've seen in the numbers doesn't match up to what the terror threat right now. And it has people feeling very disconcerted.
Absolutely. And it's political correctness run amok. If this is true that the Department of Homeland Security actually shut down an investigation that could have stopped this terrorist attack because they didn't want to profile a Muslim group, this mosque, that's political correctness run amok. And we've seen this. We've had a president who is willing to condemn gun violence, but is unwilling to say the words Islamic radicalism. We just saw in this case that the neighbors of Farouk and Malik were afraid to turn them in, even though they saw suspicious activity, because they didn't want to be called Islamophobes. Mm-hmm. Political correctness kills, and we are in a miasma of political correctness in this country today, and it's got to stop.
And the administration doesn't even understand why people are a little reluctant to let 10,000 Syrian refugees come into the country when, you know, we can't even keep the one woman who is obviously tied to radicals abroad was let in with no problems.
No, that's exactly right. And look, the president says that we're betraying American values, Republicans are, because they don't want to let in 10,000 Syrian refugees. They say they're mostly women and children. Well, this is a woman with a 6-month-old child who just killed 16 people. I mean, so Republicans raise legitimate security concerns, and they're basically accused of being anti-Muslim bigots. Mm-hmm. This is deadly stuff. It's got to stop.
The people are not against Muslims. They are against radical Muslims, yes, and those who affiliate with the Sharia and Salafi, who could potentially be problematic. Thank you both for being here. Reports on a high-profile terrorist who the Obama administration released from Guantanamo Bay, now back on the battlefield and targeting the United States. Ibrahim al-Kozi was an Osama bin Laden loyalist deemed a high risk to return to terror. Nonetheless, we let him out back in 2012. This week, we saw the release of new propaganda coming from this guy in the form of a video out of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Featured a man believed to be al-Kozi calling on Muslims living in the West to kill their neighbors. Look at his picture. Here now, Republican presidential candidate Senator Ted Cruz. No one's shocked.
Well, sadly, I mean, look, these terrorists tell us they want to kill us. And the Obama administration ignores what they say. They release him. They've released other terrorists, they've released senior Taliban leaders, and they turn around and they take up arms and they go back to trying to kill us. And you know what? American soldiers may well lose their lives trying to capture her or kill him a second time. Although if he's killed, it won't be a second time.
But people feel, you see this guy returning to terror. Yeah. Then we have the report about the State Department saying, you know, they came out today and said, you know, our procedures are good. They're all good. The visa thing, not to worry. Well, you let in a terrorist who killed 14 people. So they're really not all good. And people are feeling very disconcerted about whether our government is doing the right things to protect us.
Well, and it's abundantly clear it isn't. Anyone who watched President Obama's speech after the San Bernardino attack was horrified. This is a president who's in denial, whose head is stuck in the sand. He still refuses to say the words radical Islamic terrorism. He stands up and argues.
It's going to get the mainstream Muslims mad at it. He thinks, but he really does believe we can't alienate the good Muslims who want to work with us against terror by demonizing the religion.
It's worse than that. He believes the bad guys are the American people. It's why he stands up and says, we need to take away the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. That's exactly backwards. And this has been the consistent problem in the Obama administration, is they can't distinguish from good guys and bad guys. Not being willing to say radical Islamic terrorism contributes to their inability to fight terrorism. So, for example, in Fort Hood, Nidal Hassan, they called it workplace violence.
Just today, the White House referred to San Bernardino as gun violence. They were asked, is the president going to go out and visit those families? Mm-hmm. They said, we don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But it's unfortunate. Sometimes he does that in instances of gun violence.
Well, what you see is the president over and over again acts as an apologist for radical Islamic terrorists. And let me be clear, the word apologist is a strong word. But I think you and I were both at the National Prayer Breakfast where President Obama spoke. And it was the day after the Jordanian pilot was lit on fire by ISIS. Remember, the King of Jordan had to fly back because of that terrorist attack. And President Obama got up and he analogized ISIS's crimes. He said, well, Christians and Jews kill people too. And he compared it to the Crusades and the Inquisition. The last I checked, those ended hundreds of years ago. It's not asking too much to keep them in the present millennium. And that is exactly the argument ISIS uses. When the president gets up and gives a rationalization, a justification. You know, John Kerry said the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack was understandable. No, it was not. It was evil. It was grotesque. And we need a commander-in-chief who stands up to defeat it.
Kerry did say it, but he walked it back. Let me ask you about the NSA. We've talked about this before. But now Rubio and others are hitting you, right? As they say, they point to the fact that out in California, that, let me get it right, just 4 days before the terrorist attack, the USA Freedom Act, which you supported, which replaced basically the surveillance program we had with the NSA, limited our access to critical information. Because of that new act, which you supported, which many Republicans did not, we can now potentially only get 18 months worth of this guy's phone records as opposed to 5 years, which we could have had under the act which you opposed.
Well, look, these attacks are silliness. You're right that Marco Rubio's super PAC is spending $200,000 running attack ads directed at me. And these attack ads are suggesting that I, along with Senator Mike Lee and Tim Scott and Chuck Grassley and the National Rifle Association, that somehow conservatives in the House and Senate were responsible for the Paris terror attack. And it's just silly. And I got to tell you, Megan, you know, Mark Levin a couple of days ago wrote a great column in Conservative Review where he said that Rubio is lying and that he's following a Alinskyite attacks just like Barack Obama.
I asked Rubio about that just yesterday. But what about that, the 18 months versus the 5 years? And did we compromise our security by getting rid of that NSA surveillance program?
We didn't in any way, shape, or form. What the USA Freedom Act did was two things. Number one, it ended the federal government's bulk collection of metadata of law-abiding citizens, of your and my phone records. But number two, critically, it expanded our ability to target terrorist phones. And that's what Senator Rubio and his super PAC are lying about. It dramatically expanded the scope. It used to be, it was a relatively small slice of phone records that could be searched. Now you can search virtually every phone record. That makes law enforcement better able to target terrorists, and Rubio knows that.
Last question quickly. Behind closed doors, you said that the question of judgment is challenging in the presidential race for Donald Trump. Will you say that publicly, and why not, if not?
Listen, what I have said many times is, particularly in the wake of the Paris attack in San Bernardino, that the American people are looking with greater seriousness and gravity at a commander-in-chief. And they are making a judgment of every candidate who has the experience, who has the judgment.
Behind closed doors.
No, I discussed it in general. This is a New York Times report based on anonymous sources.
You deny doing it?
And so what I will say is that the voters are making the determination for every candidate who has the experience and judgment to have their finger on the button, to be commander-in-chief, to make the hard decisions to keep this country safe. And what I can tell you, Megan, is if I'm elected president, I will keep this country safe.